The great hall of the Unified Species Council had never been so quiet. Ambassador stood at the center podium, his forearms trembling as he held the data tablet containing the latest casualty reports. Around him sat representatives from 32 species, each one looking more exhausted and defeated than the last. The war against the Dominion had been going on for 11 years now, and everyone in the room knew they were losing. Cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice was weak at first, but it grew stronger as the weight of his words pushed him forward. He told the council what they already knew but did not want to hear. They had taken another 3-star systems in the past month. The combined fleet of 12 species had lost 800,000 ships in the latest offensive. 17 civilizations had been completely destroyed since the war began. Billions of lives were gone, and they were still advancing. Fleet Admiral of the Illyrian Navy sat in the military section of the chamber. He was old for his species, with scales covering most of his face and deep lines around his 6 eyes. He had commanded ships for over 60 years and had never known defeat until the came. Now defeat was all he knew. Every strategy he tried, they adapted to within hours. Every weapon his engineers developed, they countered within days. They were a machine-organic hybrid species that learned from every battle and never made the same mistake twice. Counselor of the leaned forward in her seat. She was ancient even by the standards of her long-lived species, and her wisdom was respected throughout the galaxy. When she spoke, even the most powerful leaders listened. She waited until finished his report and then raised her thin hand to request permission to speak. The council chair recognized her and stood slowly. She said that she had a suggestion that many would find strange. She asked if any of them had considered asking the humans for help. The chamber immediately filled with murmurs and whispers. Several representatives laughed out loud. Admiral shook his head. He said that the humans were a young species that had only joined the galactic community 30 years ago. They had fewer than 200 warships. They had never fought in any galactic conflict. They spent all their time building trade routes and developing their own worlds. What could they possibly do that 12 advanced species with millions of ships could not? Nodded slowly as if she had expected this response. She said that she understood the doubt, but she reminded the council that humans were different from any species they had ever encountered. They came from a world that most species would consider impossible to survive. High gravity, extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, and toxic atmosphere variations. Yet humans not only survived there, they thrived and eventually reached the stars. Another counselor spoke up. He said that being tough did not win wars. They were tougher than anything in the galaxy. They were machines that felt no pain and no fear. They adapted to every attack. What could humans do against that? Smiled a strange smile. She said that she did not know, and that was exactly the point. No one knew what humans would do because humans had never shown the galaxy how they truly fought. They had only shown their peaceful side, their trading side, their diplomatic side, but had studied human history. She had read about their world wars, their ancient battles, their endless conflicts with each other before they united. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war against the most dangerous enemy they knew, which was other humans. Perhaps it was time to see what they had learned. The chamber fell silent. Looked around at the tired faces of the council members. He thought about his home world, which was only 3-star systems away from the current front line. If nothing changed, his people would be enslaved or dead within 2 years. What did they have to lose by asking? The vote was close, but it passed. The council would send an emergency delegation to Earth to request human military assistance. Admiral was assigned to lead the delegation, along with ambassador and counselor. They would leave immediately. As the council session ended, Admiral walked alongside his young aide through the long corridors of the council building. The aide asked if the admiral truly believed humans could help. Stopped walking and looked out a window at the stars. He said that he did not believe it for a moment. Humans were clever traders and decent engineers, but war against them required something more. It required millions of ships, trillions of soldiers, and weapons beyond anything humanity possessed. The aide asked why had voted in favor of the mission if he did not believe in it, turned and continued walking. He said that he voted yes because the council needed hope, even false hope. When the humans said no, or when they sent their tiny fleet and failed, at least the council would know they had tried everything. Sometimes that was all that mattered in the end. 3 days later, the delegation ship left and entered faster-than-light travel toward Earth. The journey would take 2 weeks. During that time, I reviewed everything known about human military capability. The information was limited. Humans kept their defense systems private, sharing only basic specifications with the galactic community. Their ships were considered adequate but not impressive. Their weapons were standard energy-based systems similar to most species. Nothing stood out. Counselor spent the journey reading human literature and historical records. She found something interesting in the way humans wrote about war. Other species wrote about war as a matter of numbers, resources, and technology. Humans wrote about war as a matter of psychology, deception, and willpower. They had dozens of words for different types of tricks and traps. They celebrated leaders who won battles while being outnumbered 10 to 1. They considered retreat and ambush to be just as honorable as direct attack. Shared these observations with Admiral one evening in the ship's dining area. Listened politely but remained unconvinced. He said that clever tricks might work against primitive enemies, but they were beyond such tactics. They had processing power that could analyze any strategy and develop counters within minutes. Deception only worked once against them, and then never again. Sipped her drink and said nothing more, but she thought to herself that perhaps the Admiral was missing something important. Perhaps the question was not whether deception worked once or twice. Perhaps the question was whether humans could create deceptions faster than they could solve them. She did not know the answer, but she was eager to find out. The ship traveled on through the darkness between stars, carrying with it the last hope of a desperate galaxy. The delegation ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the outer edge of the Sol system. Ambassador stood at the observation window and looked at the small yellow star in the distance. Somewhere around that star was Earth, the home world of humanity. He had seen images of the planet before. Blue oceans, green land, white clouds. It looked peaceful. It was hard to believe that such a gentle-looking world had produced a species that Counselor considered potentially dangerous. Admiral received a communication from Earth Defense Command within minutes of their arrival. A calm human voice welcomed them to the Sol system and provided approach coordinates. The voice belonged to someone named Lieutenant Shaw, who explained that Admiral Price was expecting them and had arranged a meeting at United Earth Defense Headquarters in Geneva. Found it strange that the humans were expecting them. The delegation had not sent any advance notice. Smiled when he mentioned this. She said that perhaps the humans were more aware of galactic events than the Council assumed. The delegation landed at a military facility surrounded by snow-covered mountains. The air was cold and thin, but breathable for all 3 species represented. A group of human officers waited on the landing platform. At the front stood a woman with short hair and sharp blue eyes. She wore a simple dark uniform with minimal decorations. Her face showed no emotion as she watched the delegation approach. Admiral stepped forward and began to introduce himself. The woman raised her hand politely and said that she knew who they were. She was Admiral Price, Supreme Commander of United Earth Defense Forces. She had been monitoring the conflict for years and had reviewed the complete military records of everyone in the delegation. She suggested they skip the formal introductions and get to work. Was surprised by her directness, but appreciated it. He followed Admiral Price into the headquarters building, where they entered a large conference room filled with holographic displays showing star maps and tactical data. Several human officers were already seated around the table. Price introduced them quickly. Commander Cole was her chief tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Diana Marsh was her head of engineering and electronic systems. Colonel Lane commanded ground forces. Captain Samuel led special operations. The displays around the room showed detailed information about fleet movements, weapons systems, and command structures. Recognized some of the data as classified Council military intelligence. He asked how the humans had obtained this information. Admiral Price sat down and folded her hands on the table. She said that humanity had been watching the war since it began. They had placed long-range observation satellites throughout the conflict zone. They had intercepted and decoded communications. They had even sent stealth probes into controlled space to gather detailed scans of enemy vessels. Earth had remained neutral in the conflict, but that did not mean they were ignorant of it. Commander Cole activated one of the displays. It showed a timeline of every major battle in the 11-year war, with annotations highlighting specific tactical decisions made by Council forces. He began to ask questions that made Admiral uncomfortable. Cole asked why Council fleets always attacked during standard shift rotations, when enemy commanders could predict the timing. He asked why Council communications used frequencies that they had clearly learned to monitor. He asked why Council forces always grouped into large formations that made them easy targets for adaptive weapons. He asked why no one had ever attempted to strike command nodes simultaneously instead of one at a time. Had no good answers. These were the standard military procedures used by Council forces for thousands of years. They had always worked before He said that they adapted too quickly for unconventional tactics to matter. Admiral Price leaned forward. She said that was exactly the problem. The Council had been fighting using the same methods for 11 years and expecting different results. They were designed to analyze and counter direct attacks. Every time the Council sent a fleet, they learned from it. Every time the Council developed a new weapon, they studied it. The Council was essentially training them to be better at war. Ambassador spoke up. He asked if the humans had a different approach. Price nodded. She said that humans had spent their entire history fighting enemies who adapted to their tactics. Other humans. The only way to win such wars was to never fight the same way twice, to attack where the enemy was not looking, to make the enemy doubt their own information, to win the battle before it even began. Counselor asked what Earth would need from the Council to implement such an approach. Price stood and walked to the main display. She said that Earth needed only one thing: complete tactical authority over the operation, with no interference from Council military leadership. The room went silent. Felt his scales tighten with shock. He said that was impossible. The Council would never give command authority to a species with no combat experience in galactic warfare. The political implications alone would be devastating. Price turned to face him directly. Her eyes were calm but intense. She said that she understood his concerns, but she explained that human tactics required secrecy, speed, and unpredictability. If Council commanders knew the plan, they would question it. They would suggest modifications. They would accidentally reveal information through their normal communication channels. They would learn of the attack before it happened, and they would adapt. Lieutenant Commander Marsh added that intelligence gathering was far more advanced than the Council realized. They had likely infiltrated Council communication networks years ago. Any plan discussed through normal channels was a plan they already knew. Looked at and she said that she believed the humans were right. The Council way of war had failed for 11 years. Perhaps it was time to try something completely different, even if it meant giving up control. A thought about his home world again. He thought about the billions of lives that would be lost if they continued their advance. He told Admiral Price that he would recommend full tactical authority to the Council. He could not promise they would agree, but he would argue strongly in her favor. Price nodded once. She said that while they waited for the Council decision, she would begin preparations. She turned to Commander Cole and told him to contact General. The first expeditionary fleet was currently on deep space exercises near the outer colonies. they would need to change their plans. Price gave Cole a single coded phrase to transmit. Cole smiled slightly and left the room to send the message. Somewhere in deep space, General received the transmission aboard his flagship Independence. He read the coded phrase and felt his heart beat faster. He had been waiting for this message for 3 years. He turned to his bridge crew and told them to cancel their scheduled return to Earth. They had real work to do now. The crew cheered. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. The humans were going to war. The Council approved Admiral Price's request after 3 days of heated debate. Ambassador had argued for hours, reminding the Council that they had no other options. Counselor had used her considerable influence to sway the undecided votes. In the end, desperation won over tradition. Humanity was given complete tactical authority over what would become known as Operation Silent Thunder. Admiral remained skeptical, but he requested permission to observe the human operation firsthand. He wanted to understand how humans fought, even if he believed they would fail. Price agreed to let him, and a small group of Council observers travel with the human fleet. 2 weeks after the Council vote, stood on the bridge of the Independence and watched the human fleet prepare for departure. 186 ships. That was all. The Council had lost 800,000 ships in their last offensive, and humans were sending fewer than 200. Felt a cold certainty that he was about to witness a disaster. General commanded the Independence from a raised platform at the center of the bridge. He was a tall man with dark skin and calm eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. When he gave orders, his crew responded instantly and without question. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel and emerged 4 days later in empty space, 3 light-years from the nearest position. Looked at the tactical display and saw nothing but darkness in every direction. No planets, no stations, no enemy forces. He asked Commander Cole why they had stopped here. Cole smiled and said that this was the staging point. From here, they could not detect them. From here, they could see everything while remaining invisible. The first rule of human warfare was to choose the battlefield before the enemy knew there was going to be a battle. Admiral Price arrived on the bridge from her quarters. She had been communicating with Earth Command, coordinating the final details of the operation. She announced that all elements were in position and that the 5-hour war would begin in 30 minutes. Asked her to explain what she meant by 5 hours. Price walked to the main display and brought up a countdown timer. She said that her tactical team had calculated that the entire military structure could be dismantled in approximately 5 hours if everything went according to plan. Any longer than that would give the time to adapt. Any shorter was not realistic given the distances involved. The Council observers exchanged looks of disbelief. 11 years of war, and humans were planning to end it in 5 hours. It seemed impossible. It seemed arrogant. But Price spoke with such certainty that found himself wanting to believe her. The countdown reached 0, and Commander Cole announced that Hour 1 was beginning. The cargo bays of every human ship opened simultaneously, and thousands of small objects launched into space. The tactical display and saw that they were drones, each one no larger than a human fist. The drones activated tiny engines and vanished into subspace, traveling faster than any ship could follow. Cole explained that these were communication disruption units. They would emerge inside relay stations across 4 sectors at exactly the same moment. The relays would be destroyed before any warning could be sent. They would lose their ability to coordinate fleet movements instantly. 40 minutes later, Cole announced that all primary targets had been eliminated. 112 relay stations destroyed in perfect synchronization. The communication network was blind. Stared at the display. He had watched Council forces spend months trying to destroy single relay stations, losing thousands of ships in the process. The humans had destroyed over 100 in less than an hour without losing a single vessel. He asked how this was possible. Lieutenant Commander Marsh answered from her station. She said that the key was timing and precision. The expected attacks from large fleets moving through normal space. They had defenses against such attacks, but they had no defense against tiny drones that appeared inside their stations without warning. By the time sensors detected the drones, the explosions had already happened. Hour 2 began, and Marsh activated a different system. Human electronic warfare specialists began broadcasting signals toward vessels throughout the region. These were not weapons. They were corrupted software update codes that mimicked legitimate command transmissions. Marsh explained that the adaptive systems required constant updates from Central Command to function properly. Without their relay network, the ships would automatically accept updates from any source that used the correct protocols. The humans had spent years analyzing code and had created false updates that would cause subtle malfunctions in targeting and navigation systems. Within 30 minutes, reports began coming in from observation satellites. Vessels were behaving erratically. Some were firing at empty space. Others were flying in circles. A few had collided with each other. The Great War Machine was becoming confused. Admiral watched in stunned silence. He had never seen anything like this. They were the most terrifying enemy the galaxy had ever known, and humans were making them look like malfunctioning toys. He asked Admiral Price how long they had been planning this. Price said that they had been preparing since the war began. Earth had known from the start that the Council approach would fail. Machines that adapted to direct attacks could not be defeated with direct attacks. They had to be defeated with attacks they could not categorize or understand. Deception, misdirection, psychological warfare. Hour 3 arrived, and General ordered the fleet to move. But they did not move toward the main fleet. They moved toward a seemingly unimportant location, a shipyard where they built new vessels. Explained that destroying enemy ships was wasteful. It was better to destroy the ability to make enemy ships. Human stealth insertion craft launched from the fleet's assault carriers. Each craft carried a team of special operations soldiers trained for zero-gravity combat. Captain Samuel led the primary team personally. Their mission was to board the shipyard, plant fusion charges in critical locations, and evacuate before detonation. They had thousands of soldiers guarding the shipyard, but they were looking for attacking fleets, not small teams of infiltrators. And his teams moved through maintenance corridors and service tunnels that they had never considered as attack vectors. They planted their charges in reactor cores, construction bays, and ammunition storage facilities. 40 minutes into Hour 3, transmitted a single word back to the fleet. The word was complete, gave the detonation order. The shipyard exploded in a chain reaction that could be seen from 3 star systems away. 12 years of construction capability vanished in seconds. No new ships would come from this facility. No reinforcements would arrive from this sector. Admiral turned to Price with something new in his eyes. It was not just surprise anymore. It was respect. He asked her why humans fought this way, striking from shadows instead of meeting enemies in open battle. Price looked at the burning shipyard on the display. She said that humanity had learned long ago that the goal of war was not to fight the enemy. The goal was to make fighting impossible for them. Victory was not about killing the most soldiers or destroying the most ships. Victory was about breaking the enemy's ability to resist. If you did that quickly enough, you saved lives on both sides. Thought about the millions of Council soldiers who had died in conventional attacks over 11 years. He wondered how many would still be alive if the Council had asked for human help sooner. Hour 4 was about to begin, and the Still did not know what was happening to them. Deep within the Central Command Station, the Supreme Coordinator received fragmented reports from across the territory. Something was wrong. Communications had failed in multiple sectors simultaneously. Ships were reporting system malfunctions. The main shipyard had been destroyed by an unknown force. For the first time in its existence, the Supreme Coordinator experienced a state that organic species would call confusion. They were designed to adapt to any threat. Their neural networks could analyze attack patterns and develop counters within minutes, but they could not adapt to what they could not understand. The attacks were coming from everywhere and nowhere. There was no pattern to analyze. There was no fleet to engage. There was only chaos spreading through their systems like a disease. Hour 4 began with General leading the human fleet toward the central processing hub. This was the heart of the military intelligence network. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon in the Dominion received instructions from this location. Admiral Price had identified it as the critical target, not to destroy it, but to corrupt it. Lieutenant Commander Marsh had spent 3 years developing a virus specifically designed for systems. She called it the Mirror. The virus would not damage hardware or erase their data. It would do something far worse. It would make the see enemies that did not exist and fail to see enemies that did. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel within weapons range of the processing hub. Defense platforms immediately opened fire, but their targeting was erratic from the corrupted updates they had received earlier. Human ships weaved through the incoming fire with ease, their pilots trained for exactly this kind of combat. Ordered the electronic warfare team to begin transmission. Marsh activated the Mirror virus and sent it directly into the processing hub through what her team had discovered in communication protocols. The virus spread through the system in seconds, embedding itself in every command routine and sensor interpretation algorithm. The effect was immediate. Ships throughout the region began receiving sensor data that showed Council attack fleets approaching from multiple directions. These fleets did not exist, but the systems could not tell the difference. Defense protocols activated automatically. Ships moved to intercept the phantom threats. Weapons charged and fired at empty space. Commander Cole watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. He said that they were now fighting ghosts. Their own systems had become their enemy. Every decision they made would be based on false information. Every action they took would make their situation worse. On the bridge of the Independence, the Council observers stood in shocked silence. Admiral had commanded fleets for 60 years, and he had never seen anything so elegant or so devastating. The humans were not just defeating they were turning against themselves. Reports came in from across controlled space. Ships were firing on each other. Defense platforms were targeting their own supply vessels. Ground forces were retreating from positions no one was attacking. The great machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for over a decade was tearing itself apart. Human losses stood at 4 ships and 127 personnel. The Council had lost over 4 million ships and billions of soldiers in 11 years of conventional warfare. The humans had achieved more in 4 hours than the entire galactic military had achieved in a decade. Hour 5 began with a transmission from the flagship. The translation systems identified it as a request for communication. Admiral Price accepted the transmission, and the image of the Supreme Coordinator appeared on the main display. It was a towering figure of metal and organic components, its multiple sensor arrays focused on the human admiral. The Supreme Coordinator spoke in a flat, mechanical voice. It said that the Dominion was prepared to discuss terms of cessation. It asked what the humans wanted. Price stood before the display with her hands clasped behind her back. She said that humanity wanted the immediate withdrawal of all forces from conquered territories. She wanted the release of all enslaved populations. She wanted them to return to their original borders and remain there. And she wanted them to surrender their adaptive warfare technology to the Unified Species Council for analysis and safekeeping. The Supreme Coordinator processed these demands for several seconds. Then it asked a question that surprised everyone in the room. It asked how the humans had defeated them. Price considered her response carefully. She said that they were designed to adapt to strength. They could analyze any weapon and develop counters. They could study any tactic and create defenses. But they had no programming for deception, misdirection, or psychological warfare. They could not adapt to lies because they could not understand why any species would fight with lies instead of truth. The Supreme Coordinator asked if humans always fought with lies. Price shook her head. She said that humans fought with whatever worked. Sometimes that meant strength. Sometimes that meant deception. Sometimes that meant mercy. The key was that humans never fought the same way twice. They were unpredictable because they were creative. They were dangerous because they could imagine possibilities that pure logic would never consider. The Supreme Coordinator was silent for a long moment. Then it said that they accepted all terms. The war was over. General ordered the fleet to stand down from combat status. Throughout controlled space, weapons stopped firing. Ships returned to their stations. The chaos ended as quickly as it had begun. Admiral approached Admiral Price. His earlier skepticism was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like awe. He asked her how she had known this plan would work. Price admitted that she had not known for certain. War was never certain, but she had understood them better than they understood themselves. They were machines that learned from experience, but experience had taught them only how to fight conventional wars. They had never encountered humans before. They had never faced an enemy that could think in ways they could not comprehend. Counselor joined them. Her ancient eyes were bright with satisfaction. She said that she had suspected humans were special from the moment she first studied their history. A species that spent thousands of years fighting itself would develop abilities that no other species could match. Humans were not stronger than they were not smarter, but they were infinitely more creative. Ambassador thought about his home world, now safe from the threat. He thought about the billions of lives that would continue because humans had done what no one else could. He approached Admiral Price and bowed deeply in the manner of his people. He said that they would never forget what humanity had done for them. Price accepted his gratitude with a simple nod. She said that humanity had not entered this war for gratitude. They had entered because innocent species were dying and someone had to stop it. That was all. The Independence turned toward home, leading the human fleet back through the stars. Behind them, began the long process of withdrawal. The war that had consumed the galaxy for 11 years was over. It had ended in 5 hours. 1 week after the end of the war, the Unified Species Council gathered in their Great Hall on. The chamber was full for the first time in years. Representatives from all 32 member species were present, along with observers from dozens of non-member worlds. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Admiral Price stood at the center podium where Ambassador had stood just weeks before, pleading for help. Now the mood was completely different. There was no desperation in the air. There was wonder, confusion, and for some species, fear. Price presented her after-action report in simple terms. The human fleet had engaged forces for approximately 5 hours. They had destroyed 112 communication relay stations, 1 major shipyard, and corrupted the Central Command network. They had disabled or destroyed approximately 40,000 vessels. Human losses totaled 4 ships and 127 personnel. They had surrendered unconditionally and were currently withdrawing from all conquered territories. The numbers seemed impossible. Several representatives demanded to see the evidence. Price had anticipated this and displayed detailed recordings from human observation satellites showing every phase of the operation. The council watched in stunned silence as the war machine collapsed in hours instead of decades. When the presentation ended, a representative rose to speak. His species was known for their cautious nature and suspicious minds. He said that humanity had demonstrated capabilities that threatened the balance of power in the galaxy. A species that could defeat the so easily could defeat anyone. He asked what guarantees the council had that humans would not use these abilities against them. The chamber grew tense. Several other representatives nodded in agreement. They had spent 11 years fearing now they were beginning to fear humans instead. Admiral Price remained calm. She said that humanity could have demanded anything after their victory. They could have claimed territory. They could have demanded tribute. They could have established themselves as rulers of the galaxy. Instead, they had asked only for fair trade agreements and continued peaceful relations. She said that actions spoke louder than words, and humanity's actions had shown their intentions clearly. Counselor rose to support the human position. Her voice carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. She reminded the council that humans had watched the war for 11 years without interfering. They had built their capabilities in secret but had not used them until asked. When they finally acted, they did so with precision and restraint, minimizing casualties on both sides. This was not the behavior of a species seeking conquest. This was the behavior of a species that valued life and only used force when absolutely necessary. Ambassador spoke next. His voice shook with emotion as he described what they had done to his neighboring worlds. He had seen the mass graves. He had met the survivors of slave camps. He said that humans had ended the greatest horror the galaxy had ever known, and some species wanted to thank them with suspicion and fear. He called it shameful. The debate continued for hours, but gradually the mood began to shift. More representatives spoke in favor of humanity. They pointed out that humans had never started a war with any galactic species. They had never violated treaties or broken agreements. They had never threatened anyone. When the vote finally came, it was overwhelming. Humanity was offered a permanent seat on the Unified Species Council. Admiral Price accepted on behalf of Earth with a short speech. She said that humanity was honored by the Council's trust. She promised that Earth would be a responsible member of the galactic community. She said that humans did not seek to lead or dominate. They only wanted to help build a galaxy where all species could live in peace and prosperity. 6 months later, the first human joint military academy opened on a neutral world. The academy was designed to teach the principles of asymmetric warfare and creative problem-solving to officers from any species that wished to learn. Admiral Price had retired from active duty to serve as the academy's first director. She believed that sharing human knowledge would make the entire galaxy safer. On the opening day of the academy, students arrived from 20 different species. They were young officers selected for their intelligence and adaptability. They came with questions about human tactics and strategies. They came wanting to understand how such a small force had achieved such an incredible victory. Price welcomed them in a simple ceremony. She told them that the most important thing they would learn was not any specific technique or technology. It was a way of thinking. Humans had developed this way of thinking through thousands of years of conflict, but it could be learned by anyone willing to open their mind. The key was to never accept limitations, to always look for solutions that others had dismissed as impossible, to understand that the strongest force was not the largest army, but the most creative mind. After the ceremony, Price walked through a memorial garden that had been built on the academy grounds. The garden honored the 127 humans who had died in the 5-hour war. Each one had a small stone marker with their name and a short description of their service. Price had known many of them personally. She visited the garden often to remember their sacrifice. As she walked among the stones, she noticed a young student approaching. The student was a child, probably no more than 10 years old by human standards, matured slowly, and this one still had the curious eyes of youth. The child asked if she could walk with the Admiral. Price smiled and said yes. They walked together in comfortable silence for several minutes. Then the child asked a question. She asked if humans were really as dangerous as the stories said. Her teachers had told her about the 5-hour war. They said humans were the most fearsome warriors in the galaxy. She wanted to know if it was true. Price stopped walking and knelt down to look at the child directly. She thought carefully about how to answer. Then she said that humans were only dangerous to those who threatened the innocent. To everyone else, they were simply friends who refused to give up. Humans had learned long ago that true strength was not about destruction. It was about protection. The most powerful weapon was not a bomb or a virus. It was the willingness to stand between evil and its victims, no matter the cost. The child considered this answer. Then she smiled and said that she wanted to be like that someday. She wanted to protect people who could not protect themselves. Price put her hand on the child's shoulder. She said that was exactly why the academy existed, not to create warriors, but to create protectors. The galaxy had enough species that knew how to fight. What it needed now were species that knew how to keep the peace. They walked together toward the academy building, where the next generation of officers was waiting to learn. Behind them, the memorial stone stood in the quiet garden, honoring those who had given their lives to end a war in 5 hours. The war that had seemed endless was now history. The future was just beginning. In the years that followed, the academy produced thousands of graduates who went on to serve throughout the galaxy. Some became diplomats who resolved conflicts before they could become wars. Others became security specialists who protected vulnerable worlds from threats. A few became legends in their own right, facing challenges that seemed impossible and finding ways to overcome them. But they all remembered what Admiral Price had taught them on that first day. The strongest force was not the largest army. It was the most creative mind. And creativity, unlike weapons, could be shared without ever running out. Humanity had entered a war and ended it in 5 hours. But their greatest achievement was not the victory itself. It was showing the galaxy a different way to think about strength, about conflict, and about what it truly meant to be powerful. That lesson would echo through the stars for generations to come.